Picture this. You're hiking through a remote canyon in Nevada, the desert sun beating down mercilessly, when you stumble upon something that makes your blood run cold. Embedded in solid rock staring back at you is a human footprint. But this isn't just any footprint, it's massive, 18 inches long, perfectly preserved, and according to the geological dating, it's been there for over 200 million years. Welcome to History for Sleep, where we venture into the shadows of our forgotten past. I'm your guide through the labyrinth of ancient enigmas, and tonight we're asking a question that could shatter everything you think you know about human history. What if giants once walked this earth before any civilization began recording their existence? Now, before you dismiss this as fantasy or folklore, let me tell you something that will make you question the very foundation of our historical narrative. That Nevada footprint I just described is real. It was discovered in 1922, photographed, documented, and then mysteriously disappeared from public view. But it's not alone. Across every continent, in the deepest layers of rock and soil, evidence of colossal human-like beings keeps surfacing, only to be buried again by institutions that seem terrified of what these discoveries might mean. The skeleton they uncover is massive, 9 feet 7 inches from head to toe. The skull alone measures nearly twice the size of a modern human head, with pronounced brow ridges and massive jawbones. The femur, when measured against standard anthropological charts, suggests this individual would have stood nearly 10 feet tall when alive. The bone density is unlike anything in the modern human range, suggesting incredible physical strength. But here's where the story takes a dark turn. Within 72 hours of the discovery, representatives from the Smithsonian Institution arrive on site. They claim jurisdiction under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, despite the fact that local tribal leaders have never been consulted. The entire skeleton is carefully removed, catalogued, and transported to Washington, D.C. Dr. Erstreicher is asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement. The housing development proceeds as planned. When Erstreicher attempts to follow up on the find months later, he's told that no such skeleton exists in the Smithsonian's records. The photographs he took, classified. The measurements he recorded, lost in a filing error. It's as if the discovery never happened at all. This pattern of discovery and disappearance has been repeating for over 150 years across North America. From the Great Lakes to the Southwest, from California to Florida, reports of giant human skeletons surface regularly in local newspapers, only to vanish without a trace once official authorities become involved. Take the case of Lovelock Cave in Nevada, where in 1911 miners discovered the mummified remains of what appeared to be red-haired giants, some measuring over 8 feet tall. The Paiute tribe of the region had legends of the Sita Ka, a race of red-haired cannibalistic giants who they claimed to have fought and defeated in ancient times. The miners' discovery seemed to validate these oral traditions. Photographs were taken, measurements recorded, and specimens sent to the University of California for analysis. But once again, the evidence disappeared. The university claimed the remains were misplaced during a laboratory reorganization. The photographs? Lost in a fire. The only traces that remain are newspaper clippings from 1911 and the persistent Paiute legends that speak of a war against giants that lasted for generations. This systematic erasure of evidence becomes even more disturbing when you realize it's not limited to North America. In 1890, workers digging a foundation in County Antrim, Ireland, unearthed a perfectly preserved human skeleton measuring 12 feet, 2 inches in length. The giant's bones were so massive that the femur alone was longer than an entire modern human torso. Local physician Dr. William Fraser examined the remains and published a detailed report in the Belfast newsletter, complete with measurements and photographs. The skeleton was placed on display in Dublin, where thousands of visitors came to see it. But within a year, the remains had mysteriously disappeared from the museum. Dr. Fraser's report was removed from medical journals, and today only a few newspaper clippings remain as evidence that this giant ever existed. The pattern repeats across Europe. In 1613, workmen in France discovered a tomb containing a skeleton measuring over 11 feet tall. The local bishop examined the remains and declared them authentic. The skeleton was displayed in a cathedral for decades before vanishing during the French Revolution. In Germany, similar discoveries were made throughout the 19th century, only to disappear into private collections or be destroyed during the World Wars. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from the American Midwest, where Native American burial mounds have yielded hundreds of oversized skeletons. The reports are so numerous and consistent that they form an undeniable pattern. In 1883, the Smithsonian's own annual report documented the discovery of skeletons measuring between 7 and 9 feet tall in burial mounds across Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. The report noted that these giants appeared to be of a different race than modern Native Americans, with larger skulls, different bone density, and in some cases double rows of teeth. But here's what's truly chilling. When researchers today attempt to locate these specimens in the Smithsonian's collections, they're told that most were lost or destroyed due to space constraints in the early 20th century. How do you lose hundreds of giant skeletons? How do you accidentally destroy evidence that could rewrite human history? The answer might lie in what these discoveries represent. If giants truly did exist in prehistoric North America, it challenges fundamental assumptions about human evolution and migration patterns. It suggests that the narrative we've been taught about the peopling of the Americas is incomplete at best, deliberately misleading at worst. Dr. Oestreicher, the archaeologist who discovered that 9-foot skeleton in Ohio, spent years trying to understand why his find was suppressed. In private conversations, colleagues admitted that similar discoveries had been made at other sites, but that publishing such findings was career suicide. The academic establishment, it seemed, had decided that giant skeletons simply couldn't exist, and any evidence to the contrary was to be quietly disposed of. But the giants weren't just found in burial mounds. Construction projects across the Midwest regularly uncovered oversized human remains. In 1912, workers building a railroad in Wisconsin unearthed 18 skeletons, all measuring between 8 and 9 feet tall. The local newspaper reported that the skulls were of enormous size, and that the bones indicated a race of people far exceeding the size of modern humans. A representative from the Beloit College Museum arrived to examine the find. Professor Paul Matthews concluded that the skeletons belonged to an unknown race of giants, and arranged for their transport to the museum. But by the time the remains reached Beloit, they had mysteriously vanished from the shipping crates. The railway company claimed no knowledge of what happened to them. This pattern of discovery and disappearance isn't random. It's systematic. It's as if there's a coordinated effort to prevent the public from learning about our giant ancestors. But why? What could be so threatening about the existence of prehistoric giants that it requires this level of suppression? The answer might lie in what these giants represent. Evidence of a lost chapter in human history that doesn't fit the accepted narrative of gradual evolution and steady technological progress. If giants possessed advanced knowledge and abilities, if they built structures and created technologies that we can't replicate even today, then our understanding of human development is fundamentally flawed. Consider the implications. If beings of immense size and strength once dominated this continent, what happened to them? Did they die out naturally, or were they deliberately eliminated? And if they possessed knowledge that we've lost, what secrets might be buried with their bones? The Native American legends provide some clues. Across dozens of tribes, from the Lakota to the Cherokee, from the Hopi to the Iroquois, stories persist of a race of giants who ruled before the current age. These weren't gods or mythological beings, but flesh and blood entities who interacted with early human populations. The Paiute spoke of the Siteka, the red-haired giants of Nevada. The Choctaw remembered the Nahulo, a race of white giants who possessed advanced technology. The Comanche told of the giants who built the massive stone structures found throughout Texas. In every case, these oral traditions describe the giants as eventually being defeated or driven away by smaller but more numerous human tribes. But what if these legends aren't just stories? What if they're historical accounts of an actual war between two different human species? The archaeological evidence suggests that such a conflict may have occurred around 3,000 years ago, precisely when many of these giant skeletons have been carbon dated. The timing is significant. 3,000 years ago corresponds with a period of massive climate change and population upheaval across North America. It's also when the complex Mississippian culture suddenly emerged, building massive earthwork complexes that required sophisticated engineering knowledge. Could these monuments have been built by the giants themselves, or by human populations who learned from them before the final conflict? But perhaps the most detailed ancient account comes from the writings of Josephus, the first-century Jewish historian. In his Antiquities of the Jews, Josephus provides a systematic description of the giants mentioned in Hebrew scripture, treating them not as mythological beings but as historical facts. He writes, "For which reason they removed their camp to Hebron, and when they had taken it, they slew all the inhabitants. There were till then left the race of giants, who had bodies so large and countenances so entirely different from other men that they were surprising to the sight and terrible to the hearing. The bones of these men are still shown to this very day, unlike to any credible relation of other men. Josephus was writing in the 1st century CE, nearly 2,000 years ago. He claimed that giant bones were still being displayed in his time, suggesting a continuous tradition of preserving evidence of these prehistoric beings. Yet today, no museum or institution claims to possess any of these remains. The implications of this ancient testimony are staggering. We're not dealing with isolated myths or folklore, but with a global historical record that spans thousands of years and dozens of independent civilizations. From Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, from Egypt to Easter Island, the message is consistent. Giants once ruled this earth, and their existence was considered historical fact by the most learned men of the ancient world. But if these accounts are accurate, if giants truly did exist in prehistoric times, then where is the physical evidence today? The answer may lie in a systematic campaign of suppression that has been ongoing for centuries, driven by forces that understand the implications of what giant bones represent. The Catholic Church, for example, has long been accused of hiding evidence that contradicts official doctrine. Vatican archives contain thousands of documents that have never been made public, including accounts of giant discoveries made during church construction projects throughout Europe. When these finds are mentioned in church records, they're often attributed to saints of unusual stature, rather than prehistoric giants. The British Museum, one of the world's largest repositories of archaeological artifacts, has been particularly secretive about its collection of oversized human remains. Internal documents from the 19th century, obtained through Freedom of Information requests, reveal that the museum acquired dozens of giant skeletons from excavations across the British Isles. Yet none of these specimens are currently on display or available for public viewing. When researchers have attempted to examine these collections, they've been told that the items are undergoing conservation or have been temporarily relocated for study. Dr. Caroline Phillips, an anthropologist who spent 5 years trying to gain access to the British Museum's giant skeleton collection, was finally told in 2017 that no such collection exists in their records. This pattern of denial and misdirection suggests that the suppression of giant evidence isn't just about maintaining scientific orthodoxy. There may be deeper reasons why certain institutions don't want the public to know about our giant ancestors. The existence of prehistoric giants raises uncomfortable questions about human evolution, the development of civilization, and the reliability of our historical narrative. If beings of such extraordinary size and capability once ruled this planet, what happened to them? Were they naturally selected out of existence, or were they deliberately eliminated? And if they possessed advanced knowledge that we've lost, what does that say about our assumptions of continuous progress? Even more disturbing is the possibility that the giants didn't simply disappear. Throughout history, there have been scattered reports of giant sightings in remote locations around the world. From the Kandahar giant allegedly encountered by US forces in Afghanistan to the ongoing reports of massive humanoid creatures in the Pacific Northwest, evidence suggests that remnants of these ancient races may still exist in the most isolated corners of our planet. The ancient texts provide clues about where these remaining giants might be found. Enoch describes them fleeing to the ends of the earth when faced with extinction. Hindu texts speak of giants retreating to hidden valleys in the Himalayas. Native American traditions point to deep cave systems where the last giants sought refuge from human persecution. Modern satellite imagery has revealed numerous anomalies in these remote regions: geometric structures in Antarctica, massive cave systems in the Amazon basin, and underground complexes in the Gobi Desert that don't match any known geological formations. Could these be the remnants of giant civilization, or even active refuges where the descendants of these prehistoric beings continue to exist? The technology now exists to explore these possibilities. Ground-penetrating radar, genetic analysis, and advanced dating techniques could provide definitive answers about our giant ancestors. But the same institutions that have been suppressing evidence for over a century continue to control access to the most promising sites. This brings us to perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the giant mystery: the question of why this suppression continues. If giants truly existed in prehistoric times, their discovery would be one of the most significant archaeological finds in human history. The scientific value alone would be immeasurable, Yet evidence continues to disappear, research is discouraged, and questions remain unanswered. The answer may lie in what giants represent. Proof that the official narrative of human development is fundamentally flawed. If beings of extraordinary capability once ruled this earth, if they possessed knowledge and technologies that we've lost, then our assumptions about progress, evolution, and human achievement are called into question. Perhaps more importantly, the existence of giants suggests that we are not alone in the universe, that other forms of intelligent life have influenced our planet's history. This possibility challenges religious doctrine, scientific orthodoxy, and political power structures that depend on humanity's perceived uniqueness and dominance. As we've seen throughout this investigation, the evidence for prehistoric giants is overwhelming. From ancient texts to modern discoveries, from global oral traditions to systematic suppression efforts, every piece of the puzzle points to the same conclusion. We are not the first intelligent civilization to call this planet home. But the story doesn't end with suppression and cover-ups. In the deepest caves and most remote wilderness areas of our world, evidence continues to surface. And sometimes, that evidence suggests that the giants never truly disappeared at all. The satellite image appears on Dr. Elena Vasquez's computer screen at 3:47 a.m., the glow illuminating her tired eyes in the darkened laboratory at the European Space Agency's headquarters in Madrid. She's been analysing thermal anomalies from remote sensing data for over 6 months, searching for underground water sources in the Gobi Desert. But what she's seeing now has nothing to do with hydrology. Buried beneath 40 feet of sand and rock, the thermal imaging reveals a geometric structure that shouldn't exist. It's massive, stretching over 2 miles in length, and arranged in perfect mathematical proportions that nature simply doesn't create. The heat signatures suggest hollow chambers, corridors connecting vast underground spaces, and what appears to be a complex ventilation system that's somehow still functioning after thousands of years. Dr. Vasquez adjusts the image resolution, her heart pounding as the details become clearer. The structure isn't just large, it's designed for beings of enormous scale. The corridors are 30 feet wide and equally tall. The chambers could house cathedral-sized gatherings, and deep within the complex the thermal readings show something that makes her blood run cold. Heat signatures that pulse with the rhythm of living creatures. But here's what terrifies her most. This isn't the first time she's seen thermal anomalies like this. Over the past year, similar structures have appeared in satellite data from remote locations across the globe. The Amazon basin, the Siberian wilderness, the unexplored regions of Antarctica. Each time Dr. Vasquez has reported her findings to her supervisors. Each time she's been told that what she's seeing are natural geological formations or equipment malfunctions. When she attempts to access the data weeks later, the files have been classified or corrupted beyond recovery. The coordinates she recorded don't match any authorized survey areas. Her access permissions to certain satellite feeds have been quietly revoked. It's as if someone is systematically erasing evidence of these underground complexes the moment they're discovered. The pattern is always the same: discovery, documentation, official intervention, and then silence. But Dr. Vasquez has learned to be more careful. She's been keeping copies of everything on encrypted drives hidden away from official oversight. And what she's compiled over the past year suggests something that challenges everything we believe about the current state of our planet. These aren't ancient ruins. The thermal signatures, the apparent ventilation systems, the organized nature of the structures all suggest active habitation. Something is living in these underground complexes. Something large enough to require corridors 30 feet wide and chambers the size of aircraft hangars. The geographic distribution is particularly troubling. These complexes appear in the most remote, inaccessible regions of every continent. Places where human presence is minimal or non-existent. Places where something could exist undetected for decades or even centuries. The thermal readings suggest that whatever inhabits these spaces has been there for a very long time, possibly since before human civilization began monitoring these regions. Dr. Vasquez's research has led her to an uncomfortable conclusion. The giants didn't disappear. They went underground. The evidence extends beyond satellite data. In 2019, a team of spelunkers exploring a previously unmapped cave system in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania discovered something that defied explanation. Led by experienced cave explorer Andreas Müller, the team was investigating reports of unusual acoustic phenomena deep within the mountain when they encountered passages that seemed artificially enlarged. The cave system descended much deeper than any natural formation should, with smooth walls that showed clear evidence of tool marks. But these weren't marks left by modern mining equipment. The scale was all wrong. The tool marks suggested implements designed for hands 3 times the size of human hands, wielded with strength that could carve through solid rock. As the team descended deeper, the passages opened into vast underground chambers. Muller's headlamp illuminated caverns so large that the beam couldn't reach the far walls. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above, supported by massive stone pillars that showed clear evidence of deliberate construction. This wasn't a natural cave system, it was architecture. But it was the discovery in the deepest chamber that sent the team fleeing back to the surface. Scattered across the cavern floor were bones, human bones but scaled up to impossible proportions, femurs that measured over 4 feet in length, skulls the size of watermelons, rib cages that could house a grown man standing upright. The bones weren't ancient. Carbon dating would later reveal that they were less than 500 years old. Some showed evidence of deliberate burial, arranged in patterns that suggested ritual or ceremony. But others appeared to have been scattered by scavengers, as if the bodies had been left exposed before decomposition. Most disturbing of all were the bones that showed evidence of recent disturbance. Some had been moved from their original positions within the past few years. Others showed scrape marks that suggested they had been examined or handled by something with massive claws or fingernails. Muller documented everything, understanding that this discovery could revolutionize our understanding of human history. But when he attempted to report the find to Romanian authorities, he encountered a response that was now becoming familiar. Officials claimed the cave system was on restricted military land and ordered the team to surrender all documentation and photographs. The entrance to the cave was sealed with concrete within 48 hours of Muller's report. When journalists attempted to investigate the story, they were told that the cave system had been determined to be structurally unstable and posed a danger to public safety. Muller's photographs and measurements, confiscated as evidence of trespassing on government property. But Muller had learned from the experiences of others. Before contacting authorities, he had uploaded copies of his documentation to secure servers outside Romania. The images he captured show not just the bones of giants, but evidence that these underground spaces had been recently inhabited. Fresh water sources with evidence of recent use, areas where the cave floor had been cleared and arranged as if for sleeping. Tool marks in the walls that appeared to be only months old. Most unsettling of all, footprints in the soft earth of the deepest chambers. Footprints that measured over 18 inches in length and showed the clear impression of toes and heel. The implications are staggering. If giants still exist, if they're living in hidden underground complexes around the world, then the systematic suppression of giant evidence takes on an entirely different meaning. It's not just about hiding historical artifacts. It's about concealing the existence of a contemporary population that most of humanity doesn't know exists. This possibility gains credibility when you examine the pattern of missing persons, reports from remote wilderness areas around the world. Every year, thousands of hikers, explorers, and researchers disappear in locations that correspond precisely with the underground thermal anomalies that Dr. Vasquez has been tracking. The disappearances share common characteristics. They occur in extremely remote locations, often during solo expeditions or small group explorations. The missing persons are typically experienced outdoorsmen who are well equipped and familiar with wilderness survival. Search and rescue operations find no trace of their presence, as if they simply vanished without leaving any evidence behind. In some cases, items belonging to the missing persons are found months or years later in locations that make no logical sense. A backpack discovered hanging from a tree branch 40 feet above the ground. Camping equipment found in caves that require technical climbing skills to access. Personal items scattered across landscapes in patterns that suggest they were deliberately placed rather than lost. The David Paulides investigations into these disappearances have revealed disturbing patterns that official agencies seem reluctant to acknowledge. Missing persons in national parks and wilderness areas often disappear in clusters around specific geographic coordinates. When these coordinates are cross-referenced with satellite thermal anomalies, the correlation is undeniable, but perhaps most troubling are the few survivors who have returned from these remote areas with accounts that challenge our understanding of what lives in the wilderness. In 2016, solo hiker Marcus Thompson disappeared for 6 days in the Olympic National Forest of Washington State. When he finally emerged, dehydrated and traumatized, his account of what happened during those missing days was so disturbing that park officials classified his report and recommended psychiatric evaluation. Thompson claimed that he had been captured by beings of enormous size and held in an underground complex beneath the forest floor. He described his captors as human in appearance, but scaled up to proportions that made them stand 12 to 14 feet tall. They communicated through a mixture of gestures and vocalizations that sounded like a primitive form of human language. According to Thompson's account, these beings lived in a sophisticated underground society, with chambers carved from solid rock and illuminated by an unknown light source. They possessed tools and weapons that appeared to be crafted from metal alloys not found in nature. Most significantly, they seemed to be studying him, examining his equipment and clothing with an intelligence that suggested advanced cognitive abilities. Thompson claimed that he was eventually released when the giants determined he posed no threat to their concealment. But before his release, they made it clear through gestures that he was not to reveal their location or existence to others. The psychological trauma of the experience was so severe that Thompson refused to return to wilderness areas and eventually moved to an urban environment where he felt safer. Official Park Service records classify Thompson's account as a stress-induced hallucination, resulting from exposure and dehydration. But his detailed descriptions of the underground complex match thermal anomalies detected by satellite in the exact area where he disappeared. Moreover, ground-penetrating radar surveys of the region have revealed extensive cave systems that don't appear on any geological surveys. Similar accounts have emerged from remote areas around the world. In 2018, a geological survey team in the Andes Mountains of Peru reported encounters with extremely large humanoid figures that they observed from a distance through binoculars. The team's official report described the beings as standing approximately 12 feet tall and moving with a coordination that suggested high intelligence. The sighting occurred near an area where local indigenous populations have maintained traditions about giant beings living in the high mountain caves. According to these traditions, the giants are the descendants of an ancient race that retreated to the mountains when smaller humans began to dominate the lowlands. The local people leave offerings at certain cave entrances and avoid specific areas that are considered to be giant territory. When the geological team attempted to investigate the cave systems where the sightings occurred, they discovered evidence of recent habitation, cleared areas that appeared to be sleeping spaces, food preparation sites with fire pits sized for beings much larger than humans, and tool marks in the cave walls that suggested ongoing modification of the underground spaces. But perhaps most significantly, they found petroglyphs carved into the cave walls that depicted interactions between giants and smaller human figures. The carvings showed scenes of trade, communication, and what appeared to be territorial agreements. The style and technique of the carvings suggested they were created within the past few centuries, not in prehistoric times. The team's documentation of these findings was confiscated by Peruvian authorities before they could return to their home institutions. They were told that the cave systems were considered sacred sites by indigenous populations, and that access was restricted to protect cultural heritage. The petroglyphs they photographed? Dismissed as modern graffiti created by local villagers, but the pattern of contemporary giant sightings extends beyond remote wilderness areas. Urban legends and eyewitness accounts from construction sites around the world suggest that giants may occasionally venture into human-populated areas, particularly during major excavation projects that might threaten their underground territories. In 2017, construction workers building a subway extension beneath downtown Los Angeles reported encounters with extremely tall individuals in the tunnel systems. The workers described seeing figures that stood well over 9 feet tall, moving through passages that weren't on any construction blueprints. When work crews attempted to investigate these unauthorized tunnels, they found evidence of recent excavation, using tools that left marks unlike any modern construction equipment. The construction project was mysteriously halted after these encounters, with city officials citing unexpected geological complications that made the tunnel route unsafe. Workers who spoke publicly about their experiences were quickly transferred to other projects or had their employment terminated. The tunnel sections where the encounters occurred were sealed with concrete and removed from all official construction plans. Similar reports have emerged from major construction projects in cities around the world. The expansion of the London Underground system has been repeatedly delayed due to what officials describe as archaeological concerns in areas where workers have reported encounters with unusually large human figures. The construction of a new metro line in Moscow was suspended indefinitely after workers discovered a network of tunnels that weren't shown on any geological surveys. In each case, the pattern is consistent: discovery, official intervention, and then silence. But the accumulating evidence suggests that we may be dealing with a contemporary population of giants that has learned to coexist with modern human civilization while remaining largely hidden from public awareness. The technology exists to investigate these possibilities more thoroughly. Advanced ground-penetrating radar, thermal imaging, and genetic analysis could provide definitive answers about what lives in these underground complexes. But access to the most promising sites remains tightly controlled by government agencies and international organizations that seem determined to prevent public investigation. Dr. Vasquez continues her research despite the restrictions, understanding that the evidence she's uncovering could fundamentally change our understanding of what shares this planet with us. Her encrypted files now contain thermal anomalies from over 200 locations worldwide, each suggesting the presence of large-scale underground habitation in areas where human presence is supposedly minimal or non-existent. The implications extend far beyond archaeological curiosity. If giants still exist, if they've been living in hidden societies for thousands of years, then the systematic suppression of evidence takes on new urgency. These aren't just historical artifacts being hidden from public view. These are contemporary populations whose existence challenges every assumption we've made about human dominance on this planet. As she stares at the latest thermal image from the Gobi Desert, Dr. Vasquez realizes that the question isn't whether giants once existed. The question is whether they're still watching us, still sharing this world with us, still waiting in the depths of the earth for something that we can't yet comprehend. The evidence suggests that they are, and that they may not remain hidden much longer. The morning of March 15, 2021, began like any other for Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison as he reviewed intelligence reports in his sterile office at Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado Springs. But buried within the routine satellite surveillance data was an anomaly that would forever change his understanding of what moves beneath our feet. Deep beneath the Himalayas, seismic monitoring stations had detected movement patterns that defied every known geological model. The tremors weren't random earthquake activity or tectonic shifts. They followed organized patterns, rhythmic and purposeful, as if something massive was deliberately moving through underground passages. The seismic signatures suggested footsteps, but scaled up to proportions that seemed impossible. What made Harrison's blood run cold wasn't just the size of whatever was causing these disturbances, it was the coordination. Multiple seismic events were occurring simultaneously across a network spanning hundreds of miles, suggesting not just one massive entity, but an entire population moving through connected underground systems with military-like precision. Harrison had spent 20 years analyzing intelligence data from the most classified operations on Earth. He'd seen evidence of weapons programs that officially didn't exist, tracked movements of assets that governments publicly denied, and analyzed threats that could never be acknowledged in congressional hearings. But this was different. This suggested the existence of an organized civilization operating completely outside human awareness. The seismic data showed movement patterns that followed sophisticated logistics. The underground passages appeared to connect resources areas with what could only be described as population centers. The timing of the movements suggested shift changes, supply runs, and coordinated activities that indicated a level of social organization that rivaled modern human societies. But when Harrison attempted to correlate the seismic data with satellite thermal imaging of the same regions, he discovered that his security clearance wasn't high enough to access the relevant files. The thermal data from these locations had been classified at levels that exceeded even his position in military intelligence. Someone with far more authority than a lieutenant colonel had decided that information about these underground thermal signatures was too sensitive for normal military channels. Harrison's investigation led him to classified databases that officially didn't exist. Using access codes that technically violated several federal laws, he discovered that the US military had been tracking these underground movements for over 40 years. The patterns weren't new. They'd been ongoing since satellite monitoring began, but the data had been compartmentalized in such a way that no single individual could see the complete picture. What Harrison pieced together from fragments of classified reports painted a picture that challenged everything he thought he knew about national security. The underground movements weren't confined to the Himalayas. Similar seismic signatures had been detected beneath mountain ranges on every continent. The Rocky Mountains, the Andes, the Alps, the Urals all showed evidence of organized underground activity by entities of extraordinary size. Military geologists had attempted to investigate these phenomena in the 1970s, but their reports had been immediately classified and their research discontinued. The few fragments Harrison could access described discoveries that seemed to come from science fiction. Vast underground complexes with artificial lighting, ventilation systems that suggested advanced engineering, and evidence of metallurgy that didn't match any known human technology. One partially declassified report from 1978 described a deep drilling operation in Alaska that had broken through into an underground chamber. The drilling team reported that their equipment had fallen through into a void so large that dropping objects produced no audible impact. When they lowered recording equipment into the chamber, the audio captured sounds that suggested the presence of living creatures of enormous size. The drilling operation was immediately suspended and the site was sealed. The drilling team was transferred to classified assignments and required to sign non-disclosure agreements that remained in effect until their deaths. The audio recordings were classified at the highest levels of government secrecy and have never been released. Harrison's investigation revealed that similar incidents had occurred dozens of times over the past half-century. Deep mining operations, geothermal drilling projects, and underground construction had repeatedly broken through into chambers that shouldn't exist. In each case, the discoveries were quickly classified and the sites sealed. The workers involved were reassigned or retired with enhanced pension packages that included permanent non-disclosure requirements. But the most disturbing aspect of Harrison's research was the discovery that these encounters weren't accidental. Satellite monitoring and seismic analysis had given military planners advance warning of underground activity in specific regions. The deep drilling operations that accidentally broke through into giant chambers had been deliberately positioned based on intelligence about what lay beneath. The military wasn't just monitoring these underground populations, they were actively investigating them. Harrison found evidence of specialized units within various branches of the military that had been tasked with underground reconnaissance and deep terrain mapping. These units operated under classifications so restrictive that their existence was known only to a handful of senior officials. Their mission reports were classified beyond Harrison's access level, but their equipment requisitions told a disturbing story. The units were equipped for encounters with entities of extraordinary size and strength. Body armor designed to protect against impacts from objects weighing hundreds of pounds. Weapon systems calibrated for targets much larger than any known human threat. Communications equipment designed to function in underground environments where conventional radio signals couldn't penetrate. Most significantly, the units were equipped with medical facilities designed to treat injuries that couldn't be explained through conventional military operations. Trauma centers capable of handling wounds from weapons that didn't exist in any known arsenal. Psychological support teams trained to help personnel cope with encounters that challenged their understanding of reality. Harrison realized that the military wasn't just aware of the giants' existence, they were actively engaged with them. The implication sent Harrison down a rabbit hole of classified research that revealed the true scope of government knowledge about these underground populations. Intelligence agencies had been tracking giant activity since the 1950s, using increasingly sophisticated monitoring technology to map their territories and understand their social structures. The research revealed that the giants weren't just hiding from human civilization, they were actively managing their interactions with it. Seismic monitoring showed that underground movements increased dramatically whenever surface activities threatened to expose their locations. Construction projects that came too close to giant territories were sabotaged through carefully orchestrated accidents that appeared to be natural disasters or equipment failures. The giants had developed sophisticated strategies for maintaining their concealment. They monitored human communications, tracked government activities, and intervened when necessary to protect their secrecy. The systematic disappearance of giant skeleton discoveries wasn't just the result of government cover-ups. The giants themselves were actively working to prevent their exposure. Harrison found evidence of communication protocols that had been established between certain government agencies and representatives of the underground populations. The communications were conducted through intermediaries and used codes that had been developed over decades of careful negotiation. The content of these communications was classified beyond Harrison's access level, but their existence suggested a formal relationship between human authorities and giant leadership. The discovery that governments had been in communication with giant populations for decades raised disturbing questions about the nature of human civilization. How many major policy decisions had been influenced by the need to maintain secrecy about the giants' existence? How many historical events had been shaped by the requirement to prevent their exposure? Harrison's research led him to classified analyses of historical incidents that took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of giant human relations. The sudden abandonment of certain construction projects, the mysterious classification of specific geographic regions, the inexplicable policy changes that seemed to benefit no human constituency, all began to make sense when interpreted as responses to giant territorial requirements. The evidence suggested that human civilization had been operating under constraints imposed by the need to coexist with a hidden population of beings whose capabilities far exceeded our own. The giants weren't just hiding from us. We were accommodating them, making policy decisions that protected their secrecy while maintaining the illusion of human dominance on Earth. But perhaps most disturbing was Harrison's discovery that the accommodation wasn't entirely voluntary. Intelligence reports described incidents where human activities that threatened giant secrecy had been met with responses that bordered on warfare. Construction equipment destroyed by forces that exceeded any known natural phenomena. Personnel who violated territorial boundaries found in conditions that suggested encounters with entities of extraordinary strength. The giants weren't passive observers of human civilization. They were active participants who enforced their territorial rights through methods that human authorities couldn't publicly acknowledge without revealing their existence. Harrison realized that he had uncovered evidence of a shadow civilization that operated alongside human society while remaining completely hidden from public awareness. The giants had developed technologies, social structures, and territorial agreements that allowed them to coexist with modern civilization while maintaining their secrecy. They weren't remnants of a prehistoric past. They were contemporary neighbors whose existence challenged every assumption about human dominance on Earth. The weight of this knowledge became unbearable when Harrison realized the implications for global security. If giants possessed the technological capabilities suggested by the classified reports, if they had been monitoring human activities for decades, if they had developed the ability to influence major policy decisions, then the balance of power on Earth was fundamentally different from what the public believed. Harrison faced a choice that would define the rest of his life. He could continue his investigation, risking his career and potentially his life to uncover the full truth about humanity's relationship with its giant neighbors. Or he could accept the classification system that had kept this knowledge hidden for decades, understanding that some secrets were too dangerous for public consumption. His decision came when he accessed a final classified file that contained thermal imaging data from the underground complex beneath the Gobi Desert that Dr. Vasquez had discovered months earlier. The images showed not just evidence of habitation, but proof of ongoing expansion. The giants weren't just maintaining their underground territories, they were growing them. The thermal signatures revealed new tunnels being carved through solid rock, expanded chambers that could house thousands of individuals, and what appeared to be industrial facilities, producing materials that didn't match any known human technology. The giants weren't just hiding underground, they were building something. Harrison submitted his resignation from the military the following day, citing personal reasons that he couldn't discuss due to classification requirements. He moved to a remote cabin in Montana, far from any known giant territories, and began preparing for a future that he couldn't share with anyone but knew was coming, because the evidence suggested that the giants' long period of hiding was coming to an end. The underground expansion, the increased territorial enforcement, the growing sophistication of their monitoring systems all pointed to a population that was preparing for something. Whether that something was peaceful emergence or territorial expansion, Harrison couldn't determine. But the signs were unmistakable. The age of hidden giants was ending. What would replace it remained the most classified secret on Earth. As Harrison sat in his Montana cabin, reviewing the encrypted files he'd managed to preserve before his resignation, he understood that he was one of perhaps a dozen people outside the highest levels of government who knew the complete truth about what lived beneath our feet. The responsibility of that knowledge was crushing, but the implications for humanity's future made silence impossible. Somewhere beneath the mountains that surrounded his cabin, massive footsteps were echoing through corridors carved from solid stone. The giants were moving, preparing, building towards something that would change the world forever. And humanity remained blissfully unaware that their time as Earth's dominant species might be coming to an end. The evidence was overwhelming. The giants had never disappeared. They had simply been waiting. And now, after millennia of careful concealment, they were ready to reclaim the world they had once ruled. The encrypted files scattered across Harrison's desk told a story that defied comprehension, but one detail haunted him above all others. The giants weren't just building underground, they were coordinating. Thermal satellite data from the past 6 months showed synchronized construction activities across multiple continents, as if some central authority was directing a global infrastructure project that dwarfed anything humanity had ever attempted. Deep beneath the Ural Mountains, massive excavation signatures appeared at precisely the same time as similar activities under the Canadian Rockies. Tunneling operations in the Himalayas mirrored construction patterns detected beneath the Andes. The coordination suggested communication systems that spanned the globe, technologies that allowed instant coordination across vast distances, without using any electromagnetic spectrum that human monitoring could detect. Dr. Sarah Chen, a seismologist at the University of California, Berkeley, had been tracking these patterns for months without understanding their significance. Working late in her laboratory on a rain-soaked February evening in 2022, she noticed something in the seismic data that made her question everything she knew about geological science. The underground disturbances weren't random. They followed mathematical patterns that suggested deliberate engineering on a scale that challenged belief. Tunnels were being carved in perfect geometric progressions, connecting distant points with precision that required surveying capabilities beyond current human technology. The excavation rate suggested machinery that could move through solid rock as easily as humans walk through air. But what terrified Dr. Chen wasn't the scale of the construction, it was the purpose. The tunnel networks weren't random excavations or simple expansion of living spaces, they were strategic, connecting key geographic locations in patterns that could only serve one purpose: preparation for surface operations. Every major population center on Earth was now within a day's travel of these underground networks. The giants had spent decades, perhaps centuries, positioning themselves beneath humanity's most important cities. New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow, Beijing all sat unknowingly above vast tunnel systems that could deliver massive forces directly into their urban cores without any surface detection. Dr. Chen's analysis revealed that the tunnel networks followed optimal military logistics patterns. Supply lines connected resource-rich areas with staging zones positioned beneath strategic targets. The engineering was so sophisticated that it suggested planning capabilities that far exceeded human military doctrine. These weren't the random excavations of a hiding population, they were the careful preparations of a force planning to emerge. The timeline was accelerating. Seismic monitoring showed that construction activities had increased dramatically over the past year, as if some deadline was approaching that required completion of the underground network. The excavation rate suggested that whatever the giants were preparing for, it would happen soon. But Dr. Chen's most disturbing discovery came when she attempted to correlate the seismic data with historical records of missing persons in wilderness areas. The correlation was undeniable and horrifying. The underground construction had increased dramatically following spikes in unexplained disappearances, particularly those involving individuals with specialized knowledge: engineers, geologists, military personnel, and technology experts. The implication was clear. The giants weren't just monitoring human society. They were selectively acquiring human expertise to enhance their own capabilities. The missing persons weren't random victims of wilderness accidents. They were targeted acquisitions of individuals whose knowledge could advance giant technological capabilities. Harrison's files contained intelligence reports that confirmed Dr. Chen's suspicions. Military analysis had identified patterns in personnel disappearances that suggested systematic recruitment of individuals with specific skill sets. Nuclear engineers, satellite technology experts, weapons specialists, and communications engineers had vanished at rates that exceeded statistical probability. The giants were conducting a technological acquisition program that had been ongoing for decades. They were systematically identifying and acquiring human experts whose knowledge could enhance their own capabilities. The underground construction boom wasn't just expansion, it was preparation for operations that would require technologies the giants couldn't develop independently. But the most chilling aspect of this acquisition program was its sophistication. The giants weren't randomly kidnapping human experts. They were carefully selecting individuals whose disappearance wouldn't trigger major investigations. Loners, people with minimal family connections, individuals whose absence might be attributed to accidents or personal choice rather than foul play. The selection criteria suggested intelligence gathering capabilities that penetrated deep into human society. The giants had access to personal information, employment records, and psychological profiles that would require extensive surveillance networks. They weren't just hiding underground, They were actively monitoring human civilization with capabilities that exceeded those of most government intelligence agencies. Harrison found evidence that some government agencies had attempted to investigate these disappearances, but their inquiries had been met with responses that suggested the giants' intelligence networks extended into human institutions. Investigations were terminated, files were classified, and personnel were reassigned with efficiency that indicated influence at the highest levels of government. The possibility that giant agents had infiltrated human institutions was the most terrifying aspect of Harrison's research. If beings of extraordinary size couldn't operate undetected in normal human society, they might have developed other methods of gathering intelligence and influencing human activities. The files contained references to anomalous personnel in various government agencies, individuals whose background checks revealed inconsistencies that couldn't be explained through normal bureaucratic errors, employment records that showed impossible career progressions, medical files that contained physiological measurements outside normal human ranges, and security clearances granted through channels that officially didn't exist. The evidence suggested that some giants had developed the ability to operate within human society through methods that remained classified beyond Harrison's access level. Whether through advanced disguise technologies, surgical modification, or other means, they had apparently achieved the ability to place agents in positions where they could monitor and influence human activities. This infiltration capability explained the systematic suppression of giant evidence that had been ongoing for over a century. It wasn't just human authorities covering up discoveries. Giant agents within these institutions were actively working to prevent their own exposure, manipulating the system from within to maintain their people's secrecy. The scope of this infiltration was staggering. Harrison found references to anomalous personnel in the Smithsonian Institution, the British Museum, major universities, government archaeology departments, and even military intelligence agencies. The network of giant agents appeared to extend into every institution that might encounter or investigate evidence of their existence. But the infiltration wasn't limited to institutions that dealt with archaeological evidence. Giant agents appeared to be positioned within organizations that controlled critical infrastructure. Power companies, telecommunications networks, transportation systems, and emergency services. They had placed themselves in positions where they could monitor human activities and, if necessary, disrupt them. The implications for human security were overwhelming. If giants had agents positioned throughout critical infrastructure, they possessed the ability to paralyze human civilization without deploying a single underground force. They could shut down power grids, disrupt communications, halt transportation, and cripple emergency services with coordinated actions by their embedded agents. Harrison realized that humanity's apparent dominance of Earth's surface was an illusion. The giants had been allowing human civilization to develop, while positioning themselves to control or eliminate it whenever they chose. The underground construction, the territorial enforcement, the systematic suppression of evidence, all were part of a long-term strategy that was now approaching completion. Dr. Chen's seismic data showed that the tunnel networks were nearly finished. Staging areas beneath major cities were being equipped with materials that generated unusual thermal signatures, suggesting the emplacement of equipment or weapons that would be used in surface operations. The giants weren't just preparing to emerge, they were preparing to dominate. But perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that some human authorities appeared to be cooperating with this preparation. Harrison found evidence of classified agreements between certain government agencies and giant representatives, arrangements that traded human technological assistance for continued secrecy about giant existence. The agreements suggested that some human leaders understood the true balance of power and had chosen collaboration over resistance. They were providing the giants with access to human technology and expertise in exchange for positions in whatever order would emerge when the giants revealed themselves. This collaboration explained why evidence of giant existence continued to be suppressed, even as their activities became more detectable. Human authorities weren't just covering up the truth to prevent panic. They were actively facilitating giant preparations for emergence, trading humanity's ignorance for their own survival. Harrison's final classified file contained a document that chilled him to his core, a timeline. The underground construction would be completed within 18 months. The infiltration networks were already in position. The technological acquisition program had gathered sufficient human expertise to enhance giant capabilities beyond anything humanity could resist. The emergence wasn't a distant possibility. It was an imminent event with a specific schedule that was being followed with military precision. The giants had been preparing for this moment for decades, possibly centuries, and now they were ready to reclaim the surface world their ancestors had once ruled. As Harrison sat in his Montana cabin, surrounded by evidence of humanity's impending subjugation, he faced the ultimate question: was there anything that could be done to prevent it? The giants possessed overwhelming physical advantages, superior technology, strategic positioning, and intelligence networks that penetrated to the highest levels of human government. But they also had a weakness that Harrison had identified in his research. They needed secrecy. Their entire strategy depended on humanity remaining ignorant of their existence until the moment of emergence. If that secrecy could be shattered, if humanity could be warned and prepared, the giants' careful plans might be disrupted. Harrison began encrypting files, preparing evidence packages that could be distributed if the need arose. He established dead man switches that would automatically release information if he disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances. He created networks of contacts who could verify and disseminate the truth if official channels continued to suppress it. But even as he prepared these contingencies, Harrison understood the magnitude of what humanity faced. The giants weren't just another military threat that could be countered with conventional strategies. They were a superior form of life that had been allowing humanity to exist while preparing to resume their rightful dominance of Earth. The evidence suggested that the age of human civilization was ending. What would replace it was emerging from the depths, bringing with it technologies and capabilities that would reshape the world according to their ancient vision. And humanity, blissfully unaware of what moved beneath their feet, continued their daily lives, never suspecting that their time as Earth's dominant species was measured in months, not millennia. The giants were coming. The only question was whether anyone would be ready when they arrived. The morning of September 3rd, 2023 found archaeologist Dr. Rebecca Martinez standing at the edge of what would become the most significant and terrifying discovery of her career. Deep in the Amazon rainforest of Peru, her team had been excavating what appeared to be a pre-Columbian settlement when their ground-penetrating radar detected something that defied every archaeological model she knew. Buried beneath layers of sediment that carbon dating placed it over 15,000 years old, the radar revealed structures that were impossibly massive. Stone foundations that stretched for hundreds of yards, doorways that measured 20 feet in height, and chambers so vast they could house entire modern buildings. This wasn't a village or even a city. It was architecture designed for beings who towered over any known human population. But what Dr. Martinez discovered next would haunt her for the rest of her life. As her team carefully excavated the site, they uncovered not just buildings, but evidence of the creatures who had built them. Scattered throughout the ruins were artifacts that told a story of giants who possessed knowledge that seemed to come from another world entirely. Stone tablets covered in intricate carvings depicted astronomical charts with a precision that rivaled modern calculations. The giants had mapped star systems that wouldn't be discovered by human astronomers until the invention of advanced telescopes. They had calculated planetary orbits, predicted eclipses, and documented celestial events with an accuracy that suggested observational capabilities far beyond what should have been possible in prehistoric times. The tablets showed diagrams of complex machinery, engineering schematics for devices that appeared to harness natural forces in ways human science was only beginning to understand. Water wheels that could generate massive amounts of energy, pulleys and lever systems that could move blocks weighing hundreds of tons, and what appeared to be early forms of metallurgy that produced alloys stronger than modern steel. But it was the final set of tablets that made Dr. Martinez's blood run cold. These weren't technical diagrams or astronomical charts. They were historical records, written accounts of interactions between the giants and smaller human populations. And according to these records, those interactions hadn't ended peacefully. The tablets described a great war that had lasted for generations, a conflict between the giants and rapidly multiplying human tribes who sought to claim the giants' territories. The accounts were detailed and specific, describing battle strategies, weapons technologies, and casualty reports with the precision of military documentation. The giants, according to their own records, had initially viewed the smaller humans as curiosities, perhaps even pets. They had allowed human settlements to develop in the margins of giant territory, occasionally trading knowledge for resources or labour. Some tablets even suggested that individual giants had formed relationships with human communities, serving as protectors or teachers. But as human populations grew and their technology advanced, the relationship had deteriorated. The tablets described human raids on giant settlements, theft of giant technologies, and coordinated attacks designed to drive the giants from their ancestral lands. The humans had used their superior numbers and mobility to wage a guerrilla war that gradually wore down giant resistance. The final tablets in the sequence described the giants' last desperate strategy: retreat underground. Faced with overwhelming human numbers and unable to match their enemies' reproductive rates, the remaining giants had withdrawn into deep cave systems and underground complexes, sealing themselves away from the surface world they could no longer control. But these weren't the records of a defeated people accepting extinction. They were the plans of a civilization preparing for resurgence. The tablets described underground cities being constructed, resources being stockpiled, and knowledge being preserved for future generations who would eventually reclaim their birthright. Dr. Martinez realized she was looking at more than historical records. She was reading a declaration of war that had been postponed, not abandoned. The giants hadn't disappeared. They had made a strategic withdrawal, and according to their own documentation, they had never stopped planning their return. The implications sent shockwaves through her team. If these records were accurate, if giants had indeed retreated underground thousands of years ago, then the modern discoveries of underground thermal anomalies and construction activities took on an entirely different meaning. The giants weren't just hiding, they were preparing to fulfill ancient promises of reconquest. But Dr. Martinez's discovery contained an even more disturbing revelation. The final tablets weren't just historical records, they were prophecies, predictions about the conditions that would signal the time for giant emergence. According to these ancient texts, the giants had been waiting for specific signs that would indicate humanity's vulnerability to reconquest. The prophecies described a time when human populations would become so numerous that they would strain the Earth's resources, when human technology would advance to the point where it threatened the planet's stability, when human societies would become so complex that they would be vulnerable to coordinated disruption of their critical systems. Reading these ancient predictions in 2023, Dr. Martinez felt a chill of recognition. The prophecies weren't describing some distant future scenario. They were describing the modern world with uncanny accuracy. Overpopulation, environmental crisis, technological dependence, social fragmentation. All the conditions the giants had predicted were now present. According to the tablets, when these conditions were met, the giants would begin their emergence. They would use the knowledge they had preserved and the technologies they had developed during their underground exile to systematically dismantle human civilization and reclaim the surface world. The prophecies even described the methods the giants would use: disruption of human communication systems, destruction of critical infrastructure, coordinated attacks on population centers, and the systematic elimination of human leadership. It read like a modern military strategy, planned thousands of years in advance by beings who understood human weaknesses better than humans understood themselves. Dr. Martinez found herself holding documentation of a war that had been planned before human civilization had even begun to develop cities. The giants had used their technological superiority and extended lifespans to create a multi-generational strategy that accounted for every aspect of human development. But perhaps most terrifying was the realization that the prophecies weren't just predictions, they were instructions. The tablets described how future generations of giants should recognize the signs of the time for emergence, what preparations they should make, and how they should coordinate their return to the surface. The documents Dr. Martinez had discovered weren't historical artifacts. They were operational manuals for a war that was about to begin. Her team worked frantically to document everything before word of the discovery could reach authorities who might classify or confiscate the evidence. They photographed every tablet, measured every artifact, and created detailed maps of the site layout. Dr. Martinez understood that this information might be humanity's only warning about what was coming. But even as they worked, strange things began happening around the excavation site. Equipment malfunctioned in ways that suggested deliberate sabotage. Team members reported feeling watched by unseen observers. Local indigenous guides refused to enter certain areas of the site, claiming that ancient spirits were stirring in the deep places of the earth. On their final night at the site, Dr. Martinez was awakened by sounds that chilled her to the bone, deep rhythmic vibrations that seemed to come from far beneath the ground. The sounds had a pattern, almost like communication, as if something massive was moving through underground passages directly below their camp. When she checked her seismic equipment the next morning, the readings confirmed her worst fears. Large-scale movement had been detected in underground cavities that extended far deeper than any natural cave system. Something had been actively moving through tunnels beneath the excavation site, and the movement pattern suggested coordination between multiple entities of enormous size. Dr. Martinez realized that her discovery of the tablets hadn't gone unnoticed. The giants were aware that their ancient plans had been uncovered, and they were responding to that discovery. The sounds in the night hadn't been random geological activity. They had been a message, a warning that their secrecy had been violated. The team evacuated the site immediately, but not before Dr. Martinez made one final terrifying discovery. Fresh tool marks in the deepest excavated areas, cuts in the stone that had been made within the past few days. Something had been examining their work, studying what they had uncovered, assessing how much of the ancient plan had been revealed. As her helicopter lifted away from the site, Dr. Martinez watched through binoculars as the excavation was systematically destroyed by forces she couldn't see. Explosions erupted from underground, collapsing the chambers and burying the evidence beneath tons of rubble. Within hours, the site looked as if it had never been disturbed. But the tablets her team had documented told a story that couldn't be buried. The giants weren't just hiding underground. They were implementing a plan that had been thousands of years in the making. The prophecies described a coordinated emergence that would catch humanity completely unprepared, using vulnerabilities that the giants had been studying and exploiting for millennia. Dr. Martinez returned to civilization with evidence of humanity's most ancient enemy, beings who possessed the patience of geological time and the strategic thinking of apex predators. The giants had retreated underground, not in defeat, but in preparation. They had used their exile to develop technologies, study human weaknesses, and position themselves for a reconquest that would restore their dominance over Earth. The tablets contained detailed knowledge of human psychology, social structures, and technological dependencies. The giants understood humanity better than humans understood themselves, because they had been watching, learning, and planning, while humans believed them to be extinct. As Dr. Martinez compiled her research in a secure location far from any known giant territories, she realized that the evidence she had uncovered represented more than an archaeological discovery. It was intelligence about an enemy that had been preparing for war while humanity remained blissfully unaware of the threat. The prophecies spoke of a time when the giants would reveal themselves, when their underground preparations would be complete and their plans ready for implementation. According to the ancient timeline, that moment was approaching rapidly. The signs the giants had been waiting for were all present in the modern world. The war that had been postponed thousands of years ago was about to resume, and this time the giants were ready to win. Dr. Martinez understood that she possessed perhaps the only advance warning humanity would receive. The question was whether anyone would believe her in time to prepare for what was coming from the depths of the earth. The giants had been patient. They had been planning. And now they were ready to reclaim the world that had once been theirs. The evidence was overwhelming. The timeline was clear and the threat was imminent. The age of human dominance was ending, and the age of giants was about to begin. The fluorescent lights flicker in the basement archive of the Vatican Secret Archives as Cardinal Alessandro Toretti descends the marble steps, his footsteps echoing through corridors that have guarded the Church's most dangerous secrets for over 4 centuries. It's 2:30 a.m. on October 12, 2023, and what he's about to retrieve from Vault Section 17 could shatter the faith of 1 billion Catholics worldwide. Hidden behind temperature-controlled steel doors marked with Latin warnings that translate to "for the eyes of God alone," lie documents that the Church has spent centuries ensuring never see daylight. These aren't theological debates or political correspondences. They're testimonies from missionaries, bishops, and papal investigators who encountered beings that challenged the very foundation of Christian doctrine. Cardinal Toretti's hands tremble as he opens a leather-bound manuscript dated 1587. Written by Father Miguel Santos during his mission to the highlands of Bolivia. The priest's account, written in careful Latin script, describes his discovery of what he called the Nephilim of the New World, giants who claimed to be the original children of God, created long before Adam walked in Eden. According to Father Santos's testimony, these beings stood nearly 14 feet tall and possessed knowledge that predated the Bible itself. They spoke of events that occurred before the flood, described in detail the construction of structures that human hands could never have built, and claimed that they were the true inheritors of divine knowledge that had been deliberately obscured by smaller, jealous beings who rewrote history to suit their own limitations. But what terrified Father Santos wasn't their size or their claims of divine ancestry. It was their intimate knowledge of Christian scripture. These giants quoted passages from texts that wouldn't be written for centuries, described biblical events as if they had witnessed them personally, and revealed inconsistencies in church doctrine that suggested the official version of human creation was fundamentally flawed. The giants told Father Santos that they were the original sons of God mentioned in Genesis, the beings who had mated with human women to create the Nephilim. But their account differed radically from church teaching. According to their testimony, they hadn't fallen from grace or been cast out of heaven. They had been systematically hunted and driven underground by smaller humans who feared their superior knowledge and capabilities. Cardinal Toretti finds his faith shaking as he reads testimony after testimony from church officials who encountered similar beings across the globe. A bishop in Ireland who discovered giants living in caves beneath medieval monasteries. A papal investigator in Ethiopia who documented giants who possessed scrolls containing gospels that weren't included in the official Bible. A missionary in the Amazon who found giants who could predict future papal decisions with unsettling accuracy. Each account was immediately classified, and the witnesses sworn to secrecy under penalty of excommunication. The Church had developed protocols for handling these encounters, procedures that ensured the testimonies never reached Rome's official archives. Instead, they were buried in Section 17th, a vault that officially didn't exist and could only be accessed by cardinals with the highest security clearances. But tonight, Cardinal Toretti has been summoned by Pope Francis himself to retrieve these documents. The Holy Father had received disturbing reports from modern church investigators about increased giant activity around sacred sites worldwide. Construction projects beneath St. Peter's Basilica had uncovered passages that connected to vast underground networks. Seismic monitoring at the Vatican had detected movement patterns that suggested massive entities were operating in the catacombs beneath Rome itself. The Pope needed to understand what the Church had been hiding from itself for centuries. He needed to know whether the giants represented a threat to Catholic authority or a revelation that could transform human understanding of divine creation. Cardinal Toretti's research revealed that the Church's relationship with the giants was far more complex than simple concealment. Throughout history, certain popes had maintained secret communications with giant representatives, seeking their knowledge about divine mysteries that human scripture couldn't explain. The giants possessed understanding of creation, prophecy, and divine purpose that exceeded anything in the official Christian canon. In 1623, Pope Urban VIII had secretly consulted with giant scholars about the Galileo controversy. The giants confirmed that the Earth indeed orbited the Sun, but revealed that this knowledge had been deliberately hidden from humanity because it was part of a larger cosmic truth that smaller minds couldn't comprehend without losing their sanity. During the Black Death, Pope Clement VI had received guidance from giant healers who possessed medical knowledge that could have saved millions of lives. But the giants refused to share their cures widely, claiming that human overpopulation was disrupting the natural order that God had established before the flood. The documents revealed a pattern of giant intervention in human affairs that challenged everything Cardinal Toretti believed about divine providence and free will. The giants hadn't disappeared after the flood. They had continued to influence human history from the shadows, sometimes helping, sometimes hindering, always according to purposes that human minds couldn't fully grasp. But perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that the giants' influence extended to the highest levels of church hierarchy. Several popes throughout history had been chosen not through divine inspiration or political maneuvering, but through giant recommendation. The beings had been carefully guiding the development of Christian doctrine to prepare humanity for revelations that were yet to come. Cardinal Toretti found correspondence between Pope Pius X and giant representatives during World War II. The giants had warned the Pope about the Holocaust before it began, provided intelligence about Nazi activities, and offered to intervene directly to stop the genocide. But they had also made it clear that such intervention would require revealing their existence to the world, something that would fundamentally alter human civilization. The Pope had chosen to maintain the giants' secrecy rather than accept their help, a decision that haunted him for the rest of his pontificate. The letters revealed a man torn between his duty to protect human life and his understanding that giant revelation would destroy the very foundations of the faith he served. As Cardinal Toretti delved deeper into the archives, he discovered that this tension had been building for centuries. The giants were growing impatient with their role as hidden advisors. Their communications with recent popes had become increasingly urgent, warning that their long period of concealment was coming to an end. The final document in the collection was a letter delivered to Pope Benedict XVI, just days before his resignation. Written in perfect Latin on parchment that seemed to glow with its own inner light, the message was simple, but terrifying. The time of hiding ends with the next passing of Nibiru. Prepare your people for the return of the firstborn, or watch your church crumble when they learn the truth without guidance. Cardinal Torretti realized that Pope Benedict's resignation hadn't been due to age or scandal, as the world believed. He had stepped down because he couldn't bear the responsibility of presiding over the revelation that would destroy Catholic authority and transform human understanding of creation itself. Pope Francis had inherited this terrible knowledge along with the papal throne. The giants weren't just stirring in their underground kingdoms, they were preparing to emerge during a celestial event that would mark the end of the age of human dominance. And according to their communications, that event was less than 2 years away. The Church faced an impossible choice: reveal the truth about humanity's giant creators and watch 2,000 years of doctrine crumble, or maintain the deception and be exposed as complicit in the greatest cover-up in human history when the giants emerged on their own terms. Cardinal Torretti closed the final manuscript with shaking hands, understanding that he held evidence that could topple governments, destroy religions, and fundamentally alter human civilization. The giants weren't just humanity's prehistoric ancestors. They were active participants in current events, hidden architects of history who were preparing to step out of the shadows and reclaim their role as Earth's dominant species. As he climbed the marble steps toward Pope Francis's private chambers, Cardinal Torretti carried with him the weight of a secret that had shaped human history for millennia. The Church hadn't just been hiding evidence of giants, it had been collaborating with them, seeking their guidance while maintaining the illusion of human spiritual independence. The age of deception was ending, the giants were coming, and the Catholic Church, like every other human institution, would have to choose between revelation and destruction when beings older than human civilization stepped forward to reclaim their birthright as the true children of God. The morning light streaming through the stained glass windows of the papal chambers cast rainbow patterns across ancient texts as Pope Francis reviewed the documents Cardinal Torretti had retrieved from the Forbidden Vault. His weathered hands traced the Latin phrases that described encounters spanning 5 centuries, each testimony a piece of a puzzle that painted a picture more terrifying than any apocalyptic prophecy in Christian scripture. The Holy Father's worst fears were confirmed as he read account after account of giants who possessed not just physical superiority, but spiritual knowledge that exceeded anything in human religious tradition. These beings didn't just claim to be the original children of God. They demonstrated understanding of divine mysteries that suggested they had direct access to truths that human prophets could only glimpse through revelation. But it was the contemporary reports that made Pope Francis's blood run cold. In 2019, renovation work beneath the Sistine Chapel had uncovered a passage that connected to an extensive underground network. Vatican engineers following the passage had discovered a vast chamber where the walls were covered with carvings that depicted biblical events with details that didn't appear in any known scripture. The carvings showed the creation of Adam, but not as a unique divine act. Instead, they depicted Adam as one of many attempts to create smaller, more manageable versions of the original giants. The artwork suggested that humanity wasn't God's crowning achievement, but a diminished copy of an earlier, superior creation. Even more disturbing were the carvings that showed future events. Biblical prophecies were depicted alongside scenes that appeared to show the giants' emergence from underground kingdoms, their reclamation of the surface world, and the establishment of a new order where humans served their original creators in the same way that animals served humans. Vatican investigators had attempted to document these carvings, but their equipment malfunctioned in ways that suggested deliberate interference. Cameras produced images that were mysteriously corrupted. Recording devices captured sounds that spoke in languages that predated any known human tongue. And several investigators reported feeling watched by unseen presences that seemed to evaluate their worthiness to witness these ancient truths. The chamber was quickly sealed and its existence classified at the highest levels of Vatican security. But the damage to faith had already been done. The investigators who witnessed the carvings began questioning fundamental aspects of Christian doctrine. If humans were diminished copies of giants, what did that mean for concepts of human dignity, free will, and divine purpose? Pope Francis found himself confronting questions that no pontiff had ever faced. If the giants were indeed the original children of God, did they have a superior claim to divine favour? Were human prayers and worship merely pale imitations of giant spirituality? And most terrifying of all, when the giants emerged from their underground kingdoms, would God side with his original children, or with the smaller beings who had driven them into exile? The theological implications were staggering. Christian doctrine was built on the premise that humans were created in God's image and given dominion over the earth. But if giants possessed that image more perfectly, if they had been granted dominion first, then human civilization was built on a foundation of theft and deception. Pope Francis realized that the Catholic Church faced an existential crisis that went far beyond any scandal or doctrinal dispute in its history. The very legitimacy of human spiritual authority was in question. If giants possess superior knowledge of divine will, then every papal decision, every church teaching, every claim to spiritual truth could be challenged as the arrogant presumption of inferior beings. But the crisis extended beyond theology to practical matters of survival. The documents Cardinal Toretti had retrieved contained evidence that the giants hadn't just been hiding underground. They had been actively monitoring and influencing church activities for centuries, ensuring that Christian doctrine developed in ways that served their long-term purposes. The giants had guided the church's positions on scientific discovery, ensuring that certain truths remained hidden until humanity was ready to accept them. They had influenced theological debates to prevent doctrines that might interfere with their plans for eventual emergence. They had even affected the selection of popes, ensuring that the Holy See was led by individuals who could handle the knowledge of giant existence without losing their sanity or faith. Pope Francis understood that he hadn't been chosen for his theological expertise or administrative skills. He had been selected because the giants believed he possessed the psychological resilience to guide the Church through the revelation of their existence. His entire pontificate had been preparation for this moment, though he was only now beginning to understand the full scope of what was coming. The final document in Cardinal Toretti's collection was a letter addressed directly to Pope Francis, written in perfect modern Italian despite being delivered through channels that suggested it came from deep underground. The message was both an ultimatum and an offer of partnership. Holy Father, the time of concealment ends with the celestial alignment your astronomers call the Great Conjunction. We have allowed your Church to guide the smaller children for 2 millennia, but their stewardship has proven inadequate. They have multiplied beyond the Earth's capacity to sustain them. They have developed technologies that threaten the planet's stability. They have forgotten their place in the divine order. We offer you a choice. Prepare your faithful for our emergence by revealing the truth of their origins gradually, allowing them to accept their role as junior partners in the divine plan. Or remain silent and watch your authority crumble when we reveal ourselves without your guidance. Either way, the age of giant concealment ends in 18 months. Know that we bear no malice toward the smaller children. They have served their purpose in maintaining the earth during our exile, but the time has come for the original children to resume their rightful role as stewards of creation. Your cooperation will determine whether this transition occurs through guidance or through conquest. Pope Francis set down the letter with trembling hands, understanding that he faced a decision that would affect not just the Catholic Church, but the entire future of human civilization. The giants weren't asking for his permission to emerge. They were informing him of their plans and offering him the opportunity to help manage the transition. The choice was stark: collaborate with beings who claimed superior divine authority, or resist and face the destruction of everything the Church had built over 2 millennia. But there was a third option that the giants hadn't explicitly mentioned, one that Pope Francis found himself considering with growing determination. What if the giants were wrong about divine will? What if their superior knowledge and capabilities didn't grant them superior spiritual authority? What if God's choice to work through smaller, weaker humans was itself a divine preference, rather than a temporary compromise? Pope Francis began to see a path forward that neither submitted to giant authority nor ignored their existence. If the Church could reveal the truth about giants, while maintaining that human spiritual dignity came not from physical superiority, but from divine grace, it might be possible to prepare humanity for coexistence rather than subjugation. But such a strategy would require unprecedented courage from Church leadership and faith from believers. It would mean admitting that Church doctrine had been incomplete, while maintaining that it was still divinely inspired. It would require teaching that humans were junior partners in creation, while insisting that this partnership was chosen by God rather than imposed by superior beings. As Pope Francis knelt in prayer before the crucifix in his private chapel, he understood that the next 18 months would determine whether Christianity survived the revelation of giants as a living faith or crumbled as a collection of outdated myths. The giants were coming whether he prepared for them or not. The question was whether humanity would meet them as equals in God's love or as subjects to be ruled by their betters. The weight of that choice pressed down on him as he began composing the most important encyclical in church history, a document that would have to prepare 2 billion Catholics for the reality that they shared God's creation with beings whose very existence challenged everything they thought they knew about their place in the divine plan. The giants had been patient for millennia, but their patience was ending, and the Church had 18 months to prepare humanity for a revelation that would transform civilization forever. The underground bunker beneath CERN's Large Hadron Collider hummed with activity as Dr. Elena Kozlov reviewed data that officially didn't exist, gathered by experiments that were never publicly announced. As head of the Anomalous Particle Detection Division, a department so classified that its funding came through channels buried within other projects, she had spent the past 3 years tracking energy signatures that challenged everything humanity understood about physics. But tonight, as she stared at readings from the deep Earth monitoring stations positioned around the globe, Dr. Kozlov realized that the anomalies weren't coming from particle collisions or quantum fluctuations. They were coming from massive bioelectrical fields generated by living entities of extraordinary size, entities that were becoming increasingly active as they moved through underground networks that spanned continents. The readings were unmistakable. Bioelectric signatures consistent with neural activity, but scaled up to proportions that suggested brains the size of automobiles, generating thought patterns that operated on frequencies beyond normal human consciousness. The entities weren't just alive. They were thinking, planning, communicating across vast distances using electromagnetic fields that human technology was only beginning to detect. Dr. Kozlov's research had begun as an investigation into unexplained gravitational anomalies detected by the LIGO gravitational wave observatories. Deep underground, massive objects were moving in patterns that generated subtle ripples in spacetime itself. The movements were too organized to be geological and too massive to be explained by any known form of life. But as her investigation progressed, Dr. Kozlov discovered that these gravitational anomalies correlated perfectly with bioelectric readings from deep Earth monitoring stations. Whatever was moving underground was not only alive but possessed cognitive capabilities that exceeded anything in the known biological spectrum. The entities generated electromagnetic fields so powerful they occasionally interfered with satellite communications and GPS systems. Military radar installations had been tracking unexplained atmospheric disturbances that correlated with spikes in underground bioelectric activity. The giants weren't just moving through underground tunnels, they were generating fields that affected technology across vast distances.